So I just wanted to start and welcome everybody today to our panel. This is a collaboration with the Colorado Photographic Arts Center, Indigenous Photograph. My name is Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator at Colorado Photographic Arts Center here in Denver. And we have been running a month of photography festival throughout the month of March. And we have collaborated with Indigenous Photograph as part of the festival. With doing projections on a tower downtown in Denver, which we'll show some images of today. This webinar is being recorded, and we are gonna go through. Each artist on the panel is gonna speak a little bit about their project, and then we're gonna open it up for questions. If you can utilize the Q&A feature in Zoom, which you can find at the bottom right, you're welcome to put some in while artists are talking, and we'll be answering those after we kind of get through the presentations. And I just wanted to also start by sharing a land acknowledgement from Jamie Torres from the Denver City Council, which honors and acknowledges that the land on which we reside is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the land that makes up the state of Colorado. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We also recognize that government, academic, and cultural institutions were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of oppression and inequalities and recognize the current and future contributions of Indigenous communities in Denver. And I'd like to just quickly say to Citlali and Camille and Eli and Tailyr, who are joining us from all over the world today. So we're excited to have them. And I'm just going to share my screen and give one more intro. So we do have on our website, this is the link that gives a little more information about if you are in Denver, to be able to see the projections. And I'd like to just give a big thank you to all of our sponsors and to Denver Theater District and Nightlights Denver, which are sponsors of the talk today, along with all of our other sponsors for the festival. And just wanted to start it off with a slide. So just so everyone can have some context. So this is the Daniels Fisher Tower in downtown Denver. And this is what we are projecting onto. So we have collaborated with Denver Theater District and Nightlights Denver, and there's 6 gigantic projectors that are making this happen. So it's a pretty fun project to be a part of, and we're really excited to be projecting this work. The land acknowledgement is also projected as it's about 12 minutes long, and then each artist is acknowledged along with their affiliation. So with that, Camille, I'm gonna let you get started. And I have 4 of your images that I can scroll through, and also kind of your website and Instagram handle on the side here.
Okay, hello, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. As I was saying to Tailyr, it's so nice to see so many amazing women get a chance to have a voice. And why is that important? Well, I wanted to just start and tell the story quickly of how when I was very late to photography. I did not decide to become a professional photographer until I was 32 years old. And partly that was because when I was growing up, there was no one that looked like me. I saw only white men in the role of photographer. Now, that's not, of course, exclusively true. There were many people of color as photographers, but we don't necessarily know them in the way that we saw the ubiquitous amount of white men. And still today, so many men are having the voice for all of us, when obviously, I mean, women are 50% of the population. Our experience of this life and this time on the planet is quite different, I'd like to think, from a masculine viewpoint. And so I have to say, when I first started making photographs as a 30-something-year-old, I did not identify even as a woman. It did not help me to say that I was an Indigenous female photographer. And not until I had some success and I started to realize that the only way this was going to change was to basically come out as female and Indigenous, as a woman of color, and let especially children, younger people, other people know that you can do this. And it is so important for us to tell our own stories, because if we don't tell them, other people will tell them for us. And that's not what we want. And so what really pushed me to become a photographer in the first place was 9/11. And I know a lot of you are so young, it probably doesn't even register on your memory. But I was holding my now 21-year-old daughter as a baby when the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And I, in that moment, I knew the importance of a photograph as a historic document, as proof that these buildings existed, much in the same way that we have pictures of our ancestors as proof that they existed. And so I knew in that moment that I wanted to pick up a camera and document my life. And I have to tell you, I had no ambition. It wasn't like I was like, I'm going to go become a photographer and I'm going to get published in magazines and have my stuff in galleries and publish. I didn't have that. I only had the intention of showing how beautiful my life was and my experiences. And, as soon as you have intention, the universe sets you on a path. And mine took me to the ends of the earth, to the Arctic and the Antarctic, and chasing storms. And so this first picture that Samantha is showing, it's called Tracks Through the Field. And almost all of my great ideas actually come from my daughter. And when she was 8 years old, she said, "Mom, you should do that," talking about storm chasing. And so 3 days later, I was. And this image, so many of the storm chasing experiences for me were a reminder of my grandfather's teachings from when I was a child, of how every cloud is our water. Every cloud is our sweat made into this cloud, which then becomes the rain, which feeds the plants, that feeds the animals, that everything is interconnected. And so much of my work is trying to articulate this interconnectedness. Maybe you want to show the next one? Here's another one. A lot of people, I can't, I don't try to tell people what they should feel when they look at my images. This particular one, a lot of people, when they see it, they think it's scary, or, oh my God. Believe it or not, this was one of the most gentile encounters, but still incredibly powerful, because we actually stood still where we were and let this thing come right over us. And it may as well have been a UFO. It was just so incredible. And it was one of the few times in my career as a photographer where I was flabbergasted. I didn't know where to point the camera. Like, it was just so overwhelming. I didn't know what to do. So you just stay composed and you try. And the next image. So I've been going to Antarctica since 2004. And I, most, I think I'm the only woman of color that has worked in the capacity that I have as the expedition photographer on these ships. And we need more. So if anybody is interested in doing that, please contact me and I will try and channel you in the right path. But this particular sunset, I had been going, as I said, since 2004. I'd never witnessed or experienced anything like it before or after. When I first started going to the Arctic and Antarctic, I didn't know what climate change was. And I was learning as I went. I'm with scientists, climatologists, geologists, and they are teaching me, which is one of the best ways to learn, because all of them are so incredibly passionate about where they work and what they do. And this image became my first National Geographic cover, which, again, was not anything in my life I thought I would ever have access to or be asked. And I have to say that I try not to get emotional. It seems like a small thing to have a cover image on a magazine, but when you're walking through an airport somewhere in the world and you see your image on this magazine, I have to tell you, it changed the trajectory of my entire family's life. Like my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, they all have a bit of pride and a bit of authorship through me that they didn't have before. And that's why it's important that we tell our own stories. Next one. So this was a special image because I made this image on Christmas Day and in Antarctica. And my daughter, you know, I was away on ship for months at a time. And a lot of people will criticize you as a woman doing this work. They will say, how can you leave your children for so long? And I say, and I own this. I say, our children do as we show them, not what we tell them. And I need to, what kind of mother would I be to say, go out and live your dream, but I didn't have the courage to do it myself. And so we lead by example. And when I am on ship, I work hard to honor the sacrifice of my daughter not having me there with her. I think that's all my images, yeah. Well, that's my little bit. I hope that was informational. If anybody has questions, you can just put them in there and we'll get back to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. That was so amazing. And so here is another image of the tower again. And then Citlali, you're up.
Tadeusz. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. And it is an honor to be in this panel with my dear peers from Indigenous Photograph. Well, I'm Citlali Fabian, and I'm a Yalalteca photographer from Oaxaca, Mexico, currently in London. My photography practice is a journey for me. It has a way to talk about my own identity, to discuss my concerns, and open us for dialogue about our representation in images. Well, when I say our representation, I refer about my family, my community, my people. Photography has helped me to explore my identity and its connections with territory, migration, and our community bonds. In these photos that you are seeing over here, it's just 4 images for my ongoing documentary project called Ben Yaraj, which in English is I'm from Yalala. And I've been documenting for several years now my family and community spread in the south of Mexico, originally from the North Sierra in Oaxaca, but spread in Mexico City, Oaxaca City, part of other southern state, Veracruz, but also in Los Angeles, California. For me, this is a family reunion. This other image here is a photo collage that I made with a photo that my dad took almost 20 years ago. And a photo I took of my grandparents' house is the place where we stand for this photograph. This is kind of a way for me to show my relationship also with memory and how all these spaces recreate and have as a memory on myself. So this project also has helped me to witness the resilience of our culture. It is a way also to understand my history and our migration processes, our identity, and maybe to help us, my paisanos, my people, and myself included, to feel together over times and territories. This is a photo I took of my niece in Los Angeles 2 years ago. I'm an Indigenous descendant, and I affirm my identity as a Yalalteca. But while I was growing, it wasn't always that clear. I think it is especially hard to understand your own identity, to feel and embrace yourself when it has been violated, even constructed from outside ideas, and when you have been suffering oppression for generations. So it is this photo project, as I see, it's a way to honor this community growing in this heritage that we own together. I hope from this work, and the work that my peers are showing here, this this just this is just a little bit of the thousands of stories that finally are seeing light. And I really appreciate this space, because it helps us to make our voices being heard loudly. This other photo is from my cousins in Mexico City. As I said, I've been taking photographs of around different territories. And thank you, and I think Tailyr will speak about her work. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, Tailyr, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, of course. My name is Tailyr. I'm from the Flight Reservation in Montana. It's where the Salish and Kootenai reside. So I'm Salish and Kootenai. And I currently live in Missoula, which is actually where the Aboriginal homeland of Salish are from. Yeah, my work. Well, first I just want to explain what Indigenous Photograph is for those of you who may not know. Indigenous Photograph is a database of, it's a global database of Indigenous photographers from around the world. And it's used for editors or anyone who's really hiring photographers. And it really came about because historically, Indigenous communities have always been told from the outside perspective. It's been documented by, like Camille said, historically white men, and the damaging effects that has on the community itself when they only see themselves in media through the lens of a Western voice is really damaging. And so this database came to fruition as part of a way to, I guess, to combat that a little bit. Because you have editors who always say, like, we can't find Indigenous photographers, we don't know what they are, they don't exist, it's not an easy market to go to. We'd love to hire someone who knew what they were. And so now there's a database where it's like, well, here they are. And we made it global this year, which is very exciting. So now it includes Indigenous photographers from around the world. And so that's a little bit about that. A little bit about me is I grew up on the reservation in Montana, and kind of why I got into media. Specifically, I'm a journalist. I worked at a lot of newspapers before I went freelance. And as a kid growing up on the reservation, we had one big newspaper for the state of Montana, the Western state. And so their coverage of my community was always stereotypical and problematic. And it's always natives and regalia, and it's always poverty porn. And it was pretty racist in a lot of their coverage. And so growing up, I decided to become a photojournalist to kind of tell my own stories and kind of bring my own way of seeing the world into the newsroom and kind of help correct a lot of the things that I've seen, which is difficult because I'm just one person. It's a media thing. And so I quickly learned that that's very hard to do when you're still the only native in a newsroom or the only native in a space, to have to advocate for native voices on top of being an intern and not having a voice at the table anyway, and trying to force your way up there was very difficult, which is why I'm really grateful for Indigenous Photograph to give me a community to bounce back on and relate to. So now I worked at a lot of newsrooms across the country before I decided to do my own stories, because I love newsrooms and I love getting native coverage in newsrooms, but I really wanted to tell stories from my own home. And the only way to do that in Montana is to freelance. And so I started working on projects, and my biggest project to date is on blood quantum, which is when you're Indigenous in the United States, and I think in Canada maybe, when you're born with a fraction that tells you how much Native you are. And it's a colonial construct in the 1900s, but then to keep track of natives. And so basically, if your parents are Native you take their fractions, which come from their grandparents, and then you have a fraction. But it's problematic because it's a colonial system set up by non-natives, and so it's not accurate, and you can only be enrolled in one tribe at one time. So my mom, she's Crow, different tribe, and my dad is Salish and Kootenai, but they had to pick when I was born. And so I'm Salish and Kootenai now because they decided that automatically erases my mom's tribe, which is problematic because then I can only date from my tribe to have a kid enrolled there, but my tribe is running out of people to date because there's only 8,000. And so you have a really small pool of dating people. And so that brought me to my project, which is, her name is Prairie. She has two native parents from my reservation. It's actually my niece. So a lot of my work focuses, I've turned it inward and kind of exploring identity and what makes you native and who says. And so a lot of my project work turns a lens on my family, which I'm really grateful forever that they allow that and allow me to tell their stories and express that. It's an interesting position to be in, but one I'm grateful in because it's changed the way I report on everything, because I think you should treat every single person you photograph like they're your niece or your nephew or your brother or your sister, because that's how you cure journalism. I think that's how you cure the problem of parachute journalism or of stereotypes and problematic stuff. Is like, how would I want my mom or my sister or my niece to be seen, and how would I want to tell their stories? You can go to the next one. And so again, I just photograph a lot in my community of what I see and how I see it. And this is part of a mask up campaign that I helped on, where we're trying to protect our elders from the COVID virus. And so, I think what I struggled when I was a kid is seeing myself in the media or seeing people like me who are not in headdresses, who are just normal people. And for me, for a long time, it was weird to see stereotypes too. So I actively avoided, like, I don't want anybody in regalia in my photo, which limited what I could shoot. And so now I kind of focus on like, yeah, you can do it. You just got to balance it, which is what I'm focusing on now. So, her grandma, Mary Jane Charlo, she's in traditional, I think it's a wing dress, and then her granddaughter isn't. And so there's just stuff you don't really see. And having that be part of the COVID conversation, I think was really important too. You go next one. And I just focus on issues in my own communities. So there are, I think, 14 tribes in Montana and 7 reservations. And so my work really focuses on telling the stories around here. And this is a big one with MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Movement. And just, a couple teenage girls getting ready to go for a march. And it's a big issue, the missing women, because Native women go missing and are murdered at rates higher than any other ethnicity in the United States. And so it's kind of weird to see 2 teenage girls, you think it'd be for like a Friday night football game or something, but it's for a march for missing and murdered Native people. And next slide. And buffalo. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of buffalo lately because you can't really shoot in Montana without doing that. And again, it's another story as a Thanksgiving story, actually, on how with the global reckoning of race this year, how that's impacted Thanksgiving and how we see it. And so I went on a buffalo hunt with some members of the Fort Peck tribe and photographed that. So really my work just focuses on contemporizing issues in Native America and showing what it looks like today. And that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Ellie, you're up next.
Hi. That was so inspiring to hear from all of you. I'm so grateful to be in this space and to be able to share my work. So my name is Eli Farinango. I am Quichua Tabalo. I come from the northern part of Ecuador, but I've been raised in Canada. I migrated with my family when I was 9 years old, and I grew up in Ottawa, and then later I moved to Toronto for school. And most of my work, I think like Tailyr too, is focused on my family and telling our story from a perspective that's not often heard. We're Indigenous migrants that have been living here for so long and kind of unrecognized, like we don't really fit in with the Latinos and we don't really fit in like with the white people here. So we're like in this movement of recognizing as Quichuas in the diaspora. This is a portrait of my mom that I took here in our kitchen table, and it's part of my first long-term project called Runa Causa, which in Quichua means the life of the human. And I think with this project, like what I really want to show is that like one, we're here, you know, we're part of this diaspora, and that, you know, my mom and the women in our family have been able to keep our culture and pass down our culture through different ways and like very unexpected ways. And I wanted to photograph my mom in the kitchen because, not like affirming gender stereotypes or anything, but because a lot of like the love and a lot of the things that that happen in my family happen in the kitchen. Like the kitchen is the heart of our family, and my mom is the heart of our family. So I wanted to photograph her there. Next slide, please. And then this is a picture of my great grandmother. Her name is La Abuelita Rosa. And a lot of my work really focuses also on kind of connecting with my community back home in Ecuador. You know, growing up in the diaspora and really not feeling like I belonged over there or here created kind of this feeling in searching for belonging or this like nostalgia that I've always had. And I've always been really, really attracted to the archive and kind of searching in the archive for histories and for stories of people that look like me or yeah, my ancestors, because I don't know, since I was a child, I was always really attracted to visuals, but all of the images that I found were really like harmful. And this year, while I've been working on this project, you know, it's been an interesting kind of moment, because as I look through the archive, I'm more affirmed that this work is important, you know, as we create our own archive for our future generations from our own lens that can show different things, positive things that don't focus on like poverty, pain, but really try to focus on healing and like understanding that, you know, our memory and who we are is part of really, really long lineages of resistance. So I really wanted to bring my great grandmother into this, and I always think of her. Next picture, please. And then a lot of my work is also in double exposure. I came across double exposure when I was 15 years old, and I accidentally put the roll of film in the camera twice. And when I got it developed, I was like, whoa, what happened here? So since then, I was just like playing around with it. I'm a self-taught photographer. So I've played around with it. And this year during the pandemic, my family and I, for the first time, were able to really spend time with each other. We migrated here as Mindalaes, which means like traveling merchants in our tradition. So we've always like been in festivals, in fairs, you know, selling stuff from our country. Especially during the summer, it was like our busy season. So we really never had time to enjoy the weather and just really like spend time outside meaningfully. We were always busy working. And due to the pandemic, we had time to actually be in the land, plant our corn. We planted this corn for the first time here, my dad, my sister, and I. And it was really beautiful, you know, as a way of connecting to each other and really being grateful for the land that we're on and for the caretakers of this land. And yeah, and there's a portrait of my sister. And I really love this picture because, you know, coming from my culture where there's certain, I don't want to say restrictions, but like understandings of what the traditional clothes should look like. It almost feels like a transgression when you want to change it up a little bit. And my sister, she's like, can I let my hair down? Is that allowed? Is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, do what if you feel like it, for sure. So she wanted to be photographed this way. And yeah, like while I'm working on this project, I'm really also trying to change how I think about working with people and not, you know, calling them subjects, calling them collaborators, and really running like these images through them and asking them if this is okay, like really being a collaborative effort. And my sister really loved this picture of herself. Next, please. And in my work, I also do a lot of self-portraits. I grew up here, like feeling like I didn't really belong anywhere, and growing up with a lot of insecurities and like a lot of fears and a lot of doubts about myself. And the path that really has helped me and been able to like heal a lot of hurt that I have is through self-portraiture. Looking at myself and really like analyzing who I am and like being brave enough to look at myself in the eyes and really find compassion and find love for how I am. I grew up in a very, very white neighborhood where like no one looked like me. So my nose was always like a topic of discussion. And I grew up with a lot of shame around that. And it wasn't until I was like way, way older that I was editing this of Evo Morales, and I would tell this story, and I was like going really close by his nose, and I was like, oh my God, we have the same nose. I was like, wait, this is an Andean nose, like this is a trait from my ancestors, I get it. So a lot of my self-portraits are about reclaiming that love for myself, you know, that has been taken away through colonialism. And this picture is called The Dreamer, and this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, where I was just like feeling really, really exhausted, but really feeling like the need to go inward and connect with my ancestors, and realizing that, you know, my ancestors live in me, and that, you know, as Josue says, you know, we're future ancestors. And I really carry that with me and think about that when I create this kind of work. I hope that, you know, my descendants look at this and see themselves and are like, okay, it's okay to slow down and take care of myself, and you know, dream a little bit. So yeah, that's a little bit of me and my work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing. I put all the slides together, and I've just really loved seeing more of each of your projects, and then getting to hear so much more about the work, which is also powerful. So thank you for sharing, which many people have also said in the chat. I wanted to, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or if you've put them in the chat, I'm just trying to check that. I just wanted to take a few to kind of start and talk a little bit more about that idea of, you know, the archive or the family archive. You know, each one of you spoke a little bit about that in a different way of how you're looking at that, thinking about your ancestry, your history, and how that plays a different role in your photography. Whoever wants to maybe jump in. And
Okay, I'll go first. Well, in particular, I think for me, the opportunity, my family has a personal relation with photography. My dad started a business when I was a child, and photography for me like was this gift for preserving your memory. But before that, like I was with this relationship with vernacular images and being able to kind of create certain dialogues with my grandma, who was in her own way very she has a very nice relationship with photography. Photography for us was a solemnity act to preserve the memories, to preserve the faces of the beloved ones. It was an act to a performatic act. I always think about it. I was checking on my reviewing on my photos from the last years, and always when it's about taking a formal photo, or when someone of my community asks me for a photo, there is always this way to stand with so much dignity in front of the camera, and I love that relationship. For me, has been that opportunity to connect with the history, but the history that for the photos that we wanted to preserve. Not I study photography, so I know a lot of photographers who came as outsiders to take photos of my community in the North Sierra in Oaxaca, but there is a lot of other stories from our community, not just in the territory where we came from. So it is interesting to see all these relationships between, obviously, images from people who wanted to do it like what called their attention, of course, but it is I think much more rich for my experience to see all these images from from what my ancestors wanted to preserve and what they wanted to being showed to the future generations.
No, absolutely. I think too about your wet plate portraits as well, because I've seen the, you and I have met before and I've seen that work, which is so amazing. And so the eye, like just looking at those portraits of each person kind of staring back at you is just fantastic. So thank you for sharing more about that.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share any more about their?
Well, I'll just talk a little bit. Of course, I make pictures of my family, but for some reason I keep those more for our family. And the images I make of clouds and icebergs, or even animals, any other sorts of subjects, is kind of, I think in all of my travels, I'm learning that it's important for us as Indigenous people to remind the entire world that we are of this earth, that we are this family. And so this ice are our relatives, these animals are our relatives, this cloud is us. And so it's a different kind of family, but I'm trying to push people's perception of this human-centric view of how we live on the planet.
Well, and I think too, Camille, what you spoke to earlier about that idea of like the clouds, thinking about what your grandfather had taught, the clouds and what that means, and the water and how it feeds the earth. And it isn't just this kind of one thing or this amazing photograph of clouds or the sunset. There's so many more layers. And I think that, is so interesting of trying to push more to that idea of this layering and what you're showing, and all of you are showing in the work that you're making.
Thank you.
I can speak a little bit more about the archive. Like I mentioned, I've always been really fascinated with the archive. The visual archive that I had access to when I was really small were paintings that my grandfather used to commission to get made of my grandma and him. So you guys probably in Mexico, Citlali, you've probably seen them. They're like portrait paintings. So I remember those. And then some images that my uncle used to take, just I have very, very few images of my great grandfather. And it was always my curiosity to know what he looked like or what he was like. And then when I moved here, I always looked like at Nat Geos and stuff for pictures that I could pretend almost were my archive from like my ancestors. And then the images that my parents would take of each other. I've recently noticed that wherever they go, they're always taking pictures of each other. So we have a lot of pictures like that that really helped me kind of understand what they were seeing, what the world was for them. And then having pictures of Ecuador that we had brought back, very few pictures that we had brought back or that we had here in Canada. It was always a way of connecting back home and looking for those mountains, looking for those things in those images, and like really studying every single detail of every single picture I had to kind of understand or just to kind of imagine stories of what was happening in those pictures. And just, I think archives are so powerful, and I think the work that all of you are doing is so important for the future generations to not have this issue, of not having archives that come from the community that can go back and like hear our voices and know what we were thinking and how we saw the world.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. That's 100% so important. Just as the whole website, Tailyr, as you spoke to earlier, so, having this whole archive of, hearing newsrooms say, well, we don't know where to find, well, one, in my mind, you're not looking hard enough, or you're not looking enough, or not opening your eyes enough, but that there is a place. I've just, as we were preparing for this project, I've just been kind of scrolling through the website, clicking on different artists and, investigating more just the levels of stories for each artist represented is really fantastic. And oh no, go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh no, I just agree. I think for a very long time, a lot of our communities, their archives have been taken by people who aren't from the community, and that just shapes the way everyone in the world sees that. That's the way we all grew up reading National Geographic, and the way those photographers photographed communities, especially Indigenous communities, changed the way the world seen those communities. And I think all the images I see from my tribe, like in the local college here or in the city surrounding, they're all taken by non-tribal members. And I just think what a loss that is to not have the people in the photos telling their own story, how different those photos would look if they got to tell what their community looked like, and how much connection is lost for me not seeing that kind of storytelling from them. And it's not every photograph is storytelling. It's not just if you're a journalist or if you're a photographer. I just recently ran across going through old family photos. My grandma, who I didn't get to meet, she died when I was very young. She had a disposable camera, and she was in her late 20s, I think. And just seeing how she looked at herself, and there's a lot of like selfies with a disposable camera, and in her bedroom and stuff. And I think like I wish I had those photos of everyone in the community from the past, and how they see each other, what life looked like, in the kitchen where the mom is at the heart of the family, what that looked like for them. And instead I have these really cold, distant portraits of people not smiling and people in regalia, and I'm like, they're not in regalia all the time, so what did life look like actually? And I think it's really cool now. I'm seeing, because there's been such a huge push in the media to have people from their own communities tell their stories, I'm seeing so many fantastic stories I never would have seen before. And I think it's a beautiful time to be in journalism or in the media in general, because you don't have to even be published by a paper, but you can be on social media and see all these stories I never would have seen before, of lives that I've never knew existed, or the side of life that I never knew either. And so I think the archives that we're making today it's going to change the landscape of archives for the future. And that's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was for me too, in that kind of acknowledgement with the work on the tower. We made a website so that because not every image, it was an interesting project to partake in for us as an organization as well, taking all these images and trying to make everything work, with a backlit projection, and how different that is versus what you're looking at on a computer screen or an actual print. So, but making sure everyone's name, all that acknowledgement was there. The projections are great to see when it's just images, but I was like, I really want everyone to know like who the photographer is. And for both projects we've done for the projection, it was really important to me to make sure to put all of that information there. So when you're standing there, you can, maybe write the person's name down, or go look at Indigenous and really explore kind of the work that's being made. So. And I just want to put out, does anyone who is attending have any questions? If you want to throw those in the chat or in the Q&A. I thought for sure someone would have some questions, because everyone had such great things to say about their work. But yeah, I just was looking back at my notes of what I was writing down. Kind of archive was that big thing that stood out, but then that idea of identity and advocating, and I think we've touched on that already, but those how that kind of weaves through. You're all making different work, but how those elements weave through the work that you are making. And that history, creating the history, making sure the history is there, I think is so important. It really stuck with me, Camille, what you said at first, when you came into photography and what you had seen was mostly white male photographers. And, I think that has been the case with the history books and with what we've seen in the history of photography. And that I think it is starting to change, but.
I think one of the things that's very challenging for even people on the other side, the gallerists, the museum curators, the publishers, to understand that, for so many Indigenous or even just people of color, to do photography is challenging on so many levels, just financially speaking, let alone the knowing. Like I said, like I was very late to this. It was not like I was going to be an intern at the age of 32. So I had to, and I say this so that it applies to everyone, not just me, but you can write your own way into this. There is no specific formula that you have to do A plus B to get to C. I being a mother, even at the time that I was starting to do photography, I had to find a way that worked for me. And I don't feel that I compromised on being a mother, nor did I compromise on, in quotes, a career. Was it easy? Not at all. I still feel incredibly challenged in so many ways. And it's very difficult to articulate that like, for example, I was so thankful to Keely, who's also part of the Indigenous Photograph group, because he was, even though I've been published in National Geographic, I've never pitched a story to them. I don't know that way. I've always just do what I do and they find me. And thank you to him for saying, well, this is how I do it. And one of the great things about creating the Indigenous Photograph group for us that are involved is they have started this monthly kind of meetup. And I think that is so valuable. I hope that as it develops, people will have the courage to say, I don't know how to do this. Can somebody help me? Because I didn't have any of that. And the thing that I did have was I was so old starting that I felt like I had nothing to lose. Like there was nothing I could do to mess this up. And so I was like full in and bumbling and stumbling all the way through. And thank goodness, like people like Elizabeth Christ, and they're watching. People are always watching your work. I don't know how they find us, but they do. And so having the Indigenous Photographs group and that website it's going to help everybody even more. So yeah, I don't know what I was saying, but
that was great. And we've had a few questions come in. Someone asked, for all the panelists, what was your work? Was your work always focused on one subject or genre?
I can start on this one. No, actually, I started off in working at newspapers, so it was covering everything all the time, constantly, from like sports to breaking news to well, just everything. I don't know, and I still do. I really love sports a lot, and I shoot those quite a bit when I can. It's a little bit hard in Montana because there's no national sports teams here. There's no NFL or baseball or anything here, but I still pursue projects in that vein. And I think that's also what's really important about Indigenous photograph is that we aren't just hired to photograph Indigenous things, because that's also problematic. If you only have a person of that community photographing from that community, then you're still only getting one side. So I think the goal for Indigenous photograph is to kind of balance that narrative of outsider, insider perspective. Indigenous communities for the last century have been told from outside perspectives, and so it's time to swing it the other way and go hard on the inside. But same way, where it's valuable to have someone come in from the outside and tell a story for things that I probably wouldn't see from the town I'm from, because I'm from here. I don't notice the water tower maybe is really cool, and I just never noticed it because it's always there. So both perspectives are super valuable, but it's the same way that our perspective and how we see the world as Indigenous people is valuable, and not just in Indigenous settings. It's valuable in every news story and every photograph that we take. It doesn't have to just be our community, it could be anywhere. And I think that's one of my biggest goals, is to get Indigenous photographs photographing not just Native things. That's a great start, but I want us photographing everything. I want us getting every assignment, not just the ones that they think is for only Natives, So that's kind of where I'm at.
And we have some other questions. I know someone had asked about advice you'd give to your younger self. Camille typed, to be audacious, believe and act as though you deserve and should be doing the work you do. Absolutely. I don't know if
yeah, if he wants me to elaborate on that, I will. But I see Daniela has also a very good question about how do you identify as straddling boundaries of journalism and such. And so when I had decided to become a photographer, I really thought that I was a people photographer, that I was going to photograph culture and that it would be very human driven. And when I showed my work to magazines, they said initially, they said, oh, this is too pretty. You should look at showing it to galleries. And I'd go over to the galleries and the galleries would say, well, this is too informational. Maybe you should go to the magazines. And I was in this weird kind of didn't quite fit in their box. And something someone said to me, and I think it's really true, is this I don't believe that you should think outside the box. I think that we should just expand the box. And so, you know, people still struggle to say, am I a wildlife photographer? Am I an environmental photographer? Am I a fine art or documentary? Or I'm a photographer. I am literally an artist that uses a camera in this moment because who knows, maybe it will be film more in the future. But at this moment, I'm using a still camera to do these things. And that's, I let them put me in the box. It doesn't, I have no box.
Anyone else want to weigh in about how you identify, how you're straddling those boundaries? Does it matter? I don't think the box, I agree with you, Camille. Expand the box doesn't.
I agree with Camille 100%. I honestly, I was just in the call with natives and with Indigenous Photograph, and like, I didn't know what to call. I think I'm a documentary photographer. I'm studying photojournalism, but I'm not really sure where I fit. And I think what you said, Camille, of like just expanding this box and just being an artist, like I'm a person that I express through a camera is such a good and powerful statement. So I don't know if it necessarily matters. Like for me, I'm just trying to find my visual voice and express myself through image. But I think it might matter when, like, you know, presenting your work. So maybe like being clear with like maybe what are the boundaries for me, for example. Like I don't think I would ever be able to cover a war, for example. I can't go that way. So in that sense, I guess that matters. But like Camille said, I'm just a person with a camera that expresses herself that way.
So yeah, the end of that story was, at the end of the day, both of them called me because the galleries said, you know, I think we want to do more informational work on our walls. And the magazines were like, you know, our viewers want prettier images. So so it worked out. I think at the end of the day, the thing that I tell every aspiring photographer is be true to yourself, because you only have one soul. And it doesn't matter if, you know, a magazine approached me and they said, we want to give you the cover. And I said, oh, that's very exciting. What's the magazine? They're like, oh, it's Preppers 101. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's not in alignment with my values. I have to decline. So you hold your soul, know who you are, and honor that. If you don't sell that pieces of your soul, you'll get to the end of this intact.
Fantastic. Another question Daniela had, what's the best way for non-Indigenous people to improve their visual literacy when it comes to stories about Indigenous people, communities, and cultures?
Wow, that was a good question. Holy smokes. I think the best way is to do your research and do it yourself. Don't call someone because you're seeing something that upset you and be like, how can I help this X cause? And like, just because, I don't know, like figure it out. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out. Google it. Find Indigenous artists or writers or anything and follow them. Follow Indigenous creators and have them teach you in the space that they want to teach you. Absorb what they're saying without asking them to teach you directly, I think is a big one. I think constantly and I have no problem answering, you know, questions. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they're not the only person to ask that question, probably not even that day. It could be like the same question over and over and over and over again. Something that's very easily Googleable. And yeah, I just think if you really want to learn more, then you have to follow Indigenous creatives, and you're like, well, I don't know where to find those. Oh, well, we have a database that you can just create them all. And then you can follow them and see who they follow and follow the writers they follow and listen, I think is a big one. I think people who come here right now are doing good. And yeah, I just think sitting back and listening and not being offended, I guess, or offended at being corrected, because it's a learning game. And, you know, there are things that I don't know about the communities that I'm constantly corrected on. You know, Montana doesn't have any population besides white and native, and so I'm pretty ignorant on all other things, but you know, I listen to what people are saying and I attend things to expand my knowledge on other things. I think it's easy to do that in any vein. I have one more thing, but I lost my train of thought. So
Well, I also see someone is asking about Edward Curtis's collection of images.
Mhm.
And you know, my biggest problem with that work is he in his intention, he went to JP Morgan and said, I've got to document them before they all disappear. Well, hello, we're still here. And the reality is, unfortunately, those volumes of work, as stunning as they may be visually, try and set us in this acrylic enamel that we're frozen in time. And if we don't look like that, then we're not native. And if you look at me, I mean, I've got curly hair. A lot of people on the East Coast, you know, as an East Coast native, I like to say we bore the brunt of European attack for over 200 years before they got to Montana. You know, and in Middle America and South America, I mean, it's been going on for literally 500 years of this barrage of European attack. And so to expect us all to look like a Hollywood or Edward S. Curtis image is really flawed, and because it's asking us to not be a living culture. It's asking us to be some romanticized colonial notion of what, you know, the noble savage beauty is. And we are so complicated, we are so diverse, we are so varied. We come in so many different flavors and varieties, and how dare you try and say we can only be this to be native. I know a lot of his images were staged and inaccurate, and there are contemporary photographers who are basically doing the same kind of damage that aren't Indigenous, and trying again to say, oh, I'm going to photograph all these global people before they vanish. We are the most resilient people I know of, and we are still here. And just because we don't look like what you think we should look like does not negate our beauty or our significance. That's my thing on Curtis.
that was great.
Well said.
That was really great. Curtis has been coming up a lot in my life lately. But to answer a little bit of Daniela's question and kind of piggybacking on what Camille said about Indigenous people being really diverse and having really different experiences, I think one of the things is to really listen, like Tailyr said, but also don't romanticize Indigenous people or try to like blanket everyone's experience. You know, what might be true here in North America might not work in South America or in Central America, and that's our reality. Like Indigenous identities are just so diverse, and I think that's like, as an ally when working in different territories, it's really important to acknowledge that and to come in with almost like that learner mentality and like being open to being corrected if you're wrong and like relearning everything all over again. And accepting people's different protocols about how they want to be approached, and then also listening within like that community, the diversity of voices, right? Because within even that small community where you go in, like many different people will have different perspectives on very similar things. So I think just echoing what Tailyr said, listen and do your research, and don't be offended if you get corrected, or just, you hear things that might not be easy to hear. And then on credit, I don't think we can overstate the damage that the images that Curtis does, and how much that legacy is still very much alive. Like with Jimmy Nelson, he and his team still perpetuate that same mentality, and it's not something that's far away, and it's not something that's only limited to like white men who are older. I see like photographers that are our contemporaries, like younger photographers, still following in that trajectory and really feeling empowered to kind of construct indigeneity in the way that suits their purposes. And then also just kind of legitimizing very extractive practices and very damaging practices to different communities. So I think Curtis, like I said, he's been coming up a lot in my life, because I'm often like the only Indigenous person in certain spaces where people don't even understand how hurtful and damaging it is. I had someone recently say like, well, it doesn't matter, if his intention was to photograph them in their costumes and like as objects, it's okay. Like that's what he wanted to do. And it's like, no, no, it's not okay. Because it has so many repercussions, and up till now. So I think this conversation on Curtis and just kind of canceling, for lack of a better word, him is needed, and just replacing all of like the space that he occupies with Indigenous creators and Indigenous like photographers is needed, and it's time.
Thank you. I think there was one other question someone had asked: how has the photography industry up until now received your critiques of its extractive history, particularly towards Indigenous people? Which
I think there is a big push to correct it. So far as with my experience, I think it's a lot better than what it used to be, and I'm relatively green in the industry, I would say, but even in my short time here, I've noticed a big push to correct. And I'm not saying they're doing the best job at it. I'm not saying that they fixed it. There are still a lot of problematic pieces that come out daily, probably. Problematic terminology used, and depictions of Native life and Native people. But I think there's been a reckoning and a big push to do it right. And I think it's also, if you really want to get into why, it makes money. People want to hear stories. Like they're tired of seeing that stuff. I think people telling stories from their own communities is something that the audience wants to see now. I think they're tired of the other way. And I think that's the big change, is that the audience wants the change. But there have been industries like, National Geographic has made a push to try to be better. And I think there are a lot of people working really hard. I mean, obviously it's not everyone in the industry. That would be fantastic, but there's a change, and change is slow, and it's painful, and it's full of mistakes, and it's exhausting for the people pushing for the change. But it's been my experience that it's been a very slow moving cog, but it's been good. And usually when I correct people, which I do a lot because mistakes happen, and I'm very protective of the work that I do. It's also a lot more exhausting to cover these communities that I'm so a part of, because then if something happens, like when you're a photographer, you do the images and then it goes to the writer, and the writer does their things, and then it goes through like 6 copy editors, and changing one word in the caption can change the entire meaning of a photo, or it can make it bad. It can change everything. And so having to be so vigilant on top of doing it, on top of being like, hey, I know I'm a photographer, but what are you writing? can I see that? What did you say? That's wrong. And then it's been mostly pretty well taken, I think. But that's just in my experience. I know other people in the industry longer have had different experiences, but they're trying, I think, is the most important part that I've seen.
Great, thank you. I think that unless anyone else had answered that, it kind of answered all the questions we had in the chat. And then, well, I just wanted to say, if there aren't any other questions, thank you all for joining us today. I was really excited to be able to have the panel and kind of have more that went along with the projections, and to really speak more to the work that you're all doing and the work that is going on with Indigenous Photograph. And so thank you for coming today and for sharing all of your experiences and the work that you're making.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thanks for having.
Yes.
Thanks for being
Bye.
here.
Thank you so much.
And thanks so much for joining us today. And as I said, this was recorded, and so we will be getting it up on the website. So if you know anyone who missed it today and wanted to catch it. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
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 Bye.